when it comes to Nebraska, man, I can't think of too many teams across the nation where the storylines and the narratives are as well defined as they are for Nebraska. So the first thing I'll start with, and we'll of course hear from Matt Rule next week at Big Ten Media Days in Vegas, but was 2024 a breakout season? And before you answer that, of course, Nebraska's had a downtime under Scott Frost. Matt Rule's just his second season. Of course, it did not end well with Mike Riley there. They had the longest bowlless streak. That's still something that has to sink in for me. You know, the likes of Rutgers and Vanderbilt, et cetera, longer than anyone before last season. So they get to a bowl game. They get a winning season for the first time since 2016 or 17.
Yeah.
But was that any kind of a breakthrough? Did that satisfy anyone? Did that show any real progress?
I look at it as more of a step in the right direction. You still saw a lot of the similar issues in the previous years under Rule, in the previous years under Frost, kind of plagued Nebraska. The Iowa game is the epitome of that, where you dominate for 52 minutes of the game, and then you fumble it away quite literally at the end, where you have an epic collapse where you can't tackle Caleb Johnson, and he goes 75 yards, and that's what essentially won Iowa the game. So there's still things that we're looking for as a program to get over. I think it's a step in the right direction. The biggest thing for Coach Rule was changing his special teams, I think, and we've addressed that with bringing in Coach Eckler, which that costed us so many games, not even just this past year, but years past. So we're on the right track. It's a big year, though, for Coach Rule and for Nebraska.
Yeah, and in some ways you can see a huge difference between the way the program is run and the leadership there between Matt Rule and Scott Frost, light years away in some instances. But when you see it play out on the field, yeah, there have been points of progress, but it seems like there are still breakdowns near the end of games that result in one-score losses. I guess the best win last year was either Boston College or Rutgers, unless I'm missing someone there. So still the inability to take on the better teams and get the job done, and lose to some pretty marginal teams. So yeah, there were still, penalties, mistakes, turnovers, those sorts of things in the last 4 or 5 minutes of football games.
Yeah, I mean, you even saw it with the Boston College game you referenced, where Nebraska was, again, dominating that whole game. The fourth quarter comes, and then I believe they had a fake field goal that went awry. They had a blocked punt that went bad that resulted in a Boston College touchdown. And, luckily at that point, Nebraska's lead was so large where it didn't affect you, but you kind of saw it, like if this game had 10 more minutes, it maybe goes a different direction. The only game where Nebraska dominated from start to finish last year was the Wisconsin game, where they won by like 20 plus points. So I think getting rid of our prior OC, bringing in Holgorsen, the way I've always described this new staff this year is there's like the head coach, Matt Rule, who oversees all operations. You have the head coach and and Dana Holgorsen that oversees all of the offensive operations. And then you have a head coach and John Butler, who oversees all the defensive operations. So they've restructured their staff. They've brought a lot of big time hires in. I'm generous to say 8 wins is my floor, but
hopefully we keep Brian on the line, and he recognizes that the feed has frozen. So hopefully Brian can just click out and come back in. We're on Hawkeyes Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. As we mentioned off the top, Corey will be back next week. And we have loaded up the show with a Nebraska Take 1. And also we expect Tom Kakert from Hawkeye Report to be stopping by to break down some Iowa football. I counted 4 commits for the Hawkeyes since late June, since we're going back, let's say, June 22nd. So we'll get the take from Tom on the 4 most recent Iowa commits, and also a look ahead to Big Ten Media Days in Las Vegas coming up next Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. Comments and questions here. What do we got? Nebraska got good replacements for their two great D linemen. We'll find that out. And of course, Jackson's here. And that's where we stand. So again, it's me taking on the Hawkeyes show this week, and two great guests, and Brian Moore, if he can make it on back, but that's always tricky from the car. So that may not be the best of things. Then we got Tom Kakert with the Hawkeye Report. So I might be vamping about Iowa football before that, because I wanted to get the lowdown on these most recent commits and also the health of one Mark Gronowski. I posted my prediction on Iowa football over on the main channel, so check that out. Prediction video up about 3 weeks ago on Iowa. I've knocked out about 30 teams. I've taken some recent notes on Penn State and UCLA, so those will be the next two that you will see coming your way. Penn State and UCLA, and that could be how I spend the rest of my night. I cannot believe this. In a matter of moments, Jackson has determined and found out when the last time Tom Kakert was on the Hawkeyes live show. So Tom joining us for the first time in about 15 months. But we got Brian back, so that's a good thing. Brian, how you doing?
I'm good. I don't know what happened there. StreamYard
No,
just crashed on me.
Yeah, we were just talking about trying to make strides, and you pointing out personnel changes, coaching staff changes from last season to this season.
Yep. Another thing too is Nebraska brought in a lot of guys from the portal that are higher impact guys than they had in previous years, especially at wide receiver. The guys Nebraska brought in last season at wide receiver through the portal were, I would say, average receivers prior to their time at Nebraska, and they were average to below average once they were here. Nebraska brought in legitimate playmakers at wide receiver with Dane Key, with Isaiah Hunter. You got Ja'Cory Barney coming back. You got four-star wide receiver Cortez Mills, who is very much going to be a starter, or at least fourth, fifth in the rotation at wide receiver. So they've added a lot more firepower to their offense. The big concern, again, is just defensive line. We lost a lot when we lost Tony White to Florida State, as well as Terrence Knighton. So that's like my biggest concern with the entire season is that defensive line, because so much hinges on what they can or cannot do.
So you mentioned White to Florida State and Knighton. So everyone that's the D coordinator and the defensive line coach. How much of a loss do you think that is?
I think Terrence Knighton was a bigger loss than Tony White. I think it was very much obvious towards probably around that Indiana game, I'd say, where Nebraska and Matt Rule were essentially pushing Tony White out the door. They brought in Phil Snow as a consultant and basically was very much more involved with the play calling aspect of the defense. And they were kind of gently pushing Tony White out. I mean, he left for a pay cut to go to Florida State. There was a lot of good things he did, but third down defense was non-existent under Tony White. He played very conservative. He did not like to bring pressure. And I would say another thing, and Justin's talked about this a lot too, is Tony White was very much a reactionary instead of proactive defensive coordinator, where like the Indiana game is a prime example where you're getting boat raced on every play. You make zero adjustments. The next week you go to Ohio State and you shut them down. So there was a lot of things like that with Tony White where it just made me think that they were easing him out of his role at Nebraska.
We got Brian Moore here, co-host of the Nebraska, the Voice of College Football. Check out the show on Tuesday nights. That's at 7 Eastern, 6 Central, breaking down the Huskers. Excellent show. Check it out. You got to keep up with the rivals. All right, and we'll get to that point in just a second. But while we're on the topic of coordinators, and you mentioned Dana Holgorsen, a lot of people might attack his head coaching ability to a certain extent, but it's pretty well known across college football that he's one of the better minds on that side of the ball. And
Yes.
Dylan Raiola, I don't know that it was necessarily a fluke or a coincidence that he played better. Seemed to, I don't know if that was just direct coaching, coincidence, or better play calling to get the ball out of his hands, those sorts of things. So how do you feel about that continued relationship and development?
People, I think are very excited about this development with Holgerson and with Raiola. When you think back to when Dana first came in, I think it was the week before the USC game, and you immediately saw just a way more fluid offense. They weren't explosive by any means, but the picture and what you saw and the execution was a lot better. You get a whole off season now with Dana Holgerson and with Dylan Raiola. So I think they're going to air it out a lot more than they're alluding to. Coaches keep saying they're going to be 50-50. They want to focus on the run game. They didn't bring in and spend top shelf money with Dane Key and Isaiah Hunter and Ja'Cory Barney and Emmett Johnson for them to be a team that is ground and pound. I think they're going to air it out quite a bit. The development, the simplistic version of the offense that Dana's going to have, I think it could be a match made in heaven at the right time, where you have a very senior laden offensive line. You have depth at the offensive line you haven't seen in probably 10 years at Nebraska, which is crazy because we used to be like Pipeline University. So I think it's a match made in heaven, and we're going to have Dana for like maybe 2 years and just enjoy our time while we have him.
All right. Since we are on the Iowa channel, Brian, is this a real rivalry?
Yeah, I hate Iowa.
Okay.
Yeah, and they hate us. But I love it because when Nebraska joined the Big Ten, we lost out on Colorado. You lost out on Oklahoma. Heck, even Missouri, we lost that rivalry. And for so long, it felt forced with this rivalry with Iowa. But after 10 years of getting our asses kicked, year in and year out, you kind of develop that hatred a little bit. For me too, I don't like them, but it is a respect thing because you get your face stomped in for so many years in a row. At some point, that hate has to turn into some respect because they're not the most talented team. Heck, they're not even by far close to the most talented team, but they do something that no one else does better in the country, and that is execute and know who you are and stick to your game plan. And that's why Iowa gets 8, 9, 10, 11 wins year in and year out for 20 years under Kirk Ferentz.
Yeah, they sure do. And I don't know if they can invent another way to lead themselves to a walk-off field goal. They've pretty much perfected that.
Yeah, especially against Nebraska.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Uh, Brian, breakout players, anyone that we haven't heard a whole lot of on both sides of the ball that you think could really make an impact this year?
I think the most obvious one is going to be probably Dane Key, Emmett Johnson on the offensive side, just from a skill standpoint, from obviously what we're paying them with our NIL and resources. The obvious one is Dylan Raiola, but I try to stay away from that because he's the quarterback. I think Heinrich Harburg is someone to watch on offense. A converted quarterback. He's 6'5". He's 240 pounds. He runs like 23 miles per hour. He ran like a 4.5 40. They moved him over to tight end. He's someone to watch defensively. Riley Van Poppel at defensive tackle is the guy I'm watching. Dasan McCullough and Vincent Shavers at linebacker.
Very good. Brian, before we let you go, how'd you become a Nebraska fan?
I grew up in Nebraska, just outside of Omaha, in a town called
Okay.
Elkhorn. It was a smallish town at the time, and my dad and my family.
Think we've lost Brian again. And since that was my parting question, I don't know that he necessarily needs to come back. So, Brian, if you can hear me, we appreciate you stopping by. If not, if you pop back in, that's fine too. So, that is certainly up to Brian. And also, again, I'm going to check on one Tom Kakert. And Tom is from Hawkeye Report. And of course, there we got, let's see, I think we got Brian, you back? So Tom Kakert, as Jackson has discovered, and investigated for us. Just put Jackson on the trail of anything related to dates and times, and he's going to be all over it. Tom Kakert going to be joining the show. Hopefully, we've got him for the first time since March of 2024. You can catch Tom's work at Hawkeye Report. This is a good question here. If we get Brian back, I'm going to toss that one his way. Cheviota, you're on it. I wish I would have thought of this. Yes, because we had that pregame incident with Matt Rule, and I don't remember how it went down. Grant says, Nebraska is the only team I see consistently suck, yet continuously act like they are good. Well, over the last 10 years, you're right. Can't argue with that. However, they were a major power before that. So you can understand this isn't like Indiana had a good season and then they think they're everything. No, this is Nebraska football. It's one of the greatest programs in the history of college football. But yeah, anyone under the age of 15, something in that range. Nebraska had some decent teams in the 2014, 15, 16 range. Went to the second Big Ten championship game against Wisconsin. We won't mention the score, 70-31. But so if you want to talk about like good teams, bowl teams, top 25 teams, then you just have to go back. Well, it's pushing 10 years now. But if you want to talk about national championship teams, national championship contending teams, 2001, no Nebraska fan would really claim that as a great team, even though they did play for the BCS championship. They got